There's an old Irishman. He is a very wealthy fella, gentleman farmer, and he had no one, absolutely no one. He never married. His own family was gone, and he decided to provide for his own death. So he went to the local undertaker, and he said, you know, would you provide for my funeral? And they went through all the details and so on. He said, what'll it cost to have a first-rate funeral? He said, how much money do you have? He said, $50,000. He said, for 25, we'll give you the best. And then he went to Monsignor O'Brien, and he explained the same thing. He said, I'd like to have my funeral here. He said, what'll the offering be, Father? He says, how much money do you have? Well, he said, I had 50,000, but I give 25 to the undertaker to arrange that part of it. Well, he says, for the other 25, he said, we'll have the best mourners in the area, and I'll get the Cardinal from Dublin to come over for it. Fine. And he paid the two of them, and he went his way. 13 years later, he was on his deathbed. And he requested O'Rourke and O'Brien, the undertaker and the pastor, to come down to see him. And he's lying on this bed with an immaculate white cover over him. And he said, I'm told by the doctor I have less than an hour to live. Now, he said, I've only one request. Would the two of you lie here beside me, on your backs, one on either side? So they looked at each other, and request of a dying man, they did. So the three of them are lying there beside each other, staring at the ceiling. And after 20, not a word was being spoken. After 20 minutes, the old priest says, Shaughnessy, he says, we don't mind doing this, but he says, what in the name of God is this all about? Well, he says, Father, he says, in my life, I have not lived too much like our Lord and Master. But he said, I hope to die like him between you two thieves. This fella bought himself a motorcycle. He went out in the country, and it was the buzz of his little village. So he asked a cousin of his if he wanted a ride, and the guy climbed on behind him. And the wind, of course, like my jacket here, got in here, and it ballooned out behind him and so on. And he said, stop the thing. He says, God, I think I'm going to be blown off of this. And his buddy says, well, put the jacket on backwards, and I'll button it up the back. So they're riding along. All of a sudden, they hit a bump, and he loses his cousin. The fellow went sailing up in the air and plopped down. So he screeches to a halt, and he rode back, and a couple of the villagers had gathered, and they got this guy, and there he is, silent, just seated on a park bench. He says, how is he? How's my cousin? And the one old farmer says, well, God, I don't know. He said, he was talking, and he seemed all right till we twisted his head on right. This fellow was in one of these hot air balloons, and he was lost, you know. And he had to come down somewhere, so he's releasing the hydrogen or whatever it is. Anyway, down he comes, and he's up in the air about 20 feet over the ground. There's this old farmer out there raking hay, and he calls him, he said, hey there. He said, where am I? And the guy says, you can't fool me. You're in that little basket up there. This old rube from the country went into Dublin, and he got in a taxi cab, and they got to talking, as the Irish do. They were talking with each other, and the cab driver, he says, well, now, do you like riddles? Oh, he says, I love them. He says, I got a good one for you. It isn't me sister, and it isn't me brother, but it is the child of me father and mother. Who is it? And the fellow says, I haven't a clue. And the cab driver says, it's me. It's not me sister or me brother, but it is the child of me father and mother. It's me. Oh, he said, that's lovely. And he went back home, and he got a hold of one of his brothers. He says, he says, do you like riddles? Oh, he says, I love them. He said, I got a dandy for you. It isn't me sister, and it isn't me brother, but it is the child of my father and mother. Who is it? Well, he says, it's you. God, no, it ain't me at all. It's a cab driver in Dublin. What, you know, drunks do and say the wackiest things you could ever imagine, as you know. This one fellow, every night of his life, he'd eat his dinner, then he'd get roaring drunk, he'd go to the closet, the old family closet, and pull out the old family cello. And this is the way he played it. He put one finger on one string and play one note. By the hour. Drove his wife out of her mind. And after about 2 years of this, she screamed one night, knocked him right out of the chair. She says, "Will you stop that?" She says, "You are driving me crazy." Besides, she said, anytime I have ever seen anyone play a cello, the hand goes up and down the neck of that instrument, every finger moves, every string gets touched. He says, "I know. They've been looking for it, but I found it." You know, we were speaking last night, I think, about enabling. And the finest enabling story I think I ever heard, somebody once put it that even animals enable us. The last one usually to give up is the little old family pooch, and he sits there sad looking at us. Well, anyway, they tell the story of this old cow, old Bossy. She was the kindest, gentlest, sweetest old thing, gave milk by the gallon. And her master, the farmer, was an alcoholic. And one morning about 5:30, she's looking out the barn window and sees him coming out of the house, tiptoeing on eggs. He was hung over, he was in pain. And she's in such sympathy with him. She's thinking, the poor soul, he's so sick. So when he walked into the barn, she says to him, "Now I'll tell you what, do you see the pail and the stool? Bring them over here." He did. She said, "Put the stool down and sit on it and stick the pail under me." He did. She turned around, looked at him, she said, "Now, when you're ready, you grab hold and I'll jump up and down." That is enabling. Well, you know what the sheriff said to his posse? Says, "Shoot low, boys, they're riding Shetlands," is what the sheriff said to his posse. Two ladies were standing over the coffin of one lady's husband. And the lady next door says to her, "How did he die?" Well, she said, "He died in his sleep yesterday." She said, "I went up at 7. I woke him up, told him to come down for breakfast. He didn't come down, and I went up a couple of hours later, and there he was, dead in bed." Now, she said if he'd gotten up when I told him to, he'd be alive today. This Irishman got himself a hearing aid, and his wife says, "Well, has it helped?" He said, "Yes. Last week I heard from a brother in Australia I haven't heard from in 2 years." Anyway. Speaking of hearing aids, there's an Irish lady in Boston. Her name was O'Keefe. She's leaving the hospital in April with her 14th baby. She's standing on the front stoop of the hospital with the little infant in her arms, waiting for her husband to come around with the car. And the Mother Superior of the nursing order there, she says, "Well, now, goodbye, Mrs. O'Keefe." She said, "We'll be here next April when you come in to have your next baby." She says, "Reverend Mother, I don't think I'll be doing that." "Well, why?" She said, "You're married 15 years. Every year in April you come in like clockwork. And you always have a good, lively, bouncy, very, very healthy baby. Why can't we expect the same thing next year?" "Well," she says, "things will be different, Reverend Mother, now that I've got my hearing aid." She says, "You're what?" She says, "My hearing aid." She said, "What in the name of heavens does that have to do with it?" She says, "Everything." She said, "I didn't know it at all, but I'm hard of hearing." And she says, "Before I got the hearing aid, every single night of my life, we'd be getting ready to go to bed, and Pat would look at me and he'd say, 'Now, Mary, do you want to go to sleep or what?' And I'd always say, 'What?'" You These two morons are building a rocket, and somebody said, what's that for? You going to the moon? No, I said, we're going to the sun. He said, you're nuts. You go to the sun, you'll burn up. He said, well, we know that. That's why we're going at night. Two fellows come back from fishing. They're in a rowboat, and one says to the other, he said, did you drop a marker at the place out there where we caught all the fish? No, I says, I did something better. He said, I put an X on the side of the boat. He said, you dummy, how can you be sure we'll get the same boat next time? Fella's in a burning house, and the firemen come, they're holding a blanket, they say, jump, we'll catch you. He says, I know you fellas, you'll pull it away. No, 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 the house is burning, jump into the blanket. He said, I refuse, I know you and your practical jokes. They said, jump. He said, put the blanket on the ground, then I'll jump. I don't know whether I told you or not, but did I tell you this before? The Irishman he called Aer Lingus. He wanted to come to the United States, and he says, how long will it take one of them 747s to fly from Dublin to New York? And the girl said, just a minute. He said, my God, that's fantastic. I heard this story years ago in Dayton, Ohio. It's a good one. A fellow walked across the street from his house to a vet's office. He said, I have a very real problem. He said, I have an expensive exotic bird, and he said, I know something's wrong with him. I think he's dying. And the fellow said, what kind of a bird is it? And when he told him, he said, oh, yeah. He said, that is an extremely rare and therefore very expensive bird. He said, what's wrong? I don't know. He said, he seems to be losing weight. He's very, very lethargic. He said, he's just, I don't know. He said, he's not singing, nothing. And the vet said, is there a big pile of seed under him? Yes. He said, I'll tell you why the bird is rare. He said, most of them die. The fellow said, why? He said, they have a problem with the upper part of the beak growing out over the lower part. And he said, your bird is dying. He's starving to death. He can't hold his seed. That's why I asked if it was down below. He said, he's dropping most of it. Oh. Well, he said, what do I do? He said, bring him in and I'll file it even. Well, he said, I am a master machinist. He said, during the war, I used to file machine gun barrels to within a tolerance of 1/10,000th of an inch. He said, filing is my life. He said, lend me your file, I'll do it. Well, he said, you have to be a little careful because if you file the least bit over, the lower part of the beak will grow out and he'll drown himself. He'll get water in his lungs by scooping up too much of it. Lend me the file, I know how to file. Well, they had an argument. And the fellow said, okay, I'll lend you the file. Well, he couldn't find one. By now, this guy's all heated up. He said, get down to the second vet, about 2 blocks down. He may have one. And he had to go through the same old hullabaloo over and again. He's really miffed. He can't find one. Went to the third vet. Sure enough, after the long argument over and over again, he lent him one of the files. 20 minutes later, he gets all the vets together. Well, my bird's dead. They said, we tried to tell you that. We tried to tell you that if you he said the filing had nothing to do with it. He was already dead when I took his head out of the vise. Little girl came home to her little village from the big city of Dublin, and she said, "Ah, Ma," she said, "I've met the most wonderful fella." But she says, he's a Protestant. Will you pray for him? And the mother says, yes, indeed, honey. The next week she came, she said, Ma, your prayers are working. Went to church with me. Well, fine. She says, I'll get the nuns in on it too. They'll pray with me. The following week she came, she says, he asked to see the priest. I think he's taking instructions. Well, that's good. She said, I'll get the monks from the monastery to join in. And she come back the next week and she says, oh, my Lord, Ma, she said, the prayers are being answered. He's taking instructions to come into the church. She come busting back the next week and says, stop the prayers, for heaven's sake, he wants to be a priest. This old lady went to confession. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 2 weeks since my last confession. And she says, I committed adultery. He says, how old are you? She says, I'm 80. When did this happen? She says, when I was 20. Oh, he says, have you been carrying that guilt around all these years? Oh, no, Father. She says, I confessed it immediately after it happened. He says, why are you confessing it now? She says, I just love to talk about it. These three Irishmen were going to be executed one at a time and by firing squad. So they lead Shaughnessy out, and when the leader of the squad said, ready, aim, he yelled, hurricane! God, they all scattered and he got out. The next one was O'Rourke. And they got him up against the wall, and the firing squad's ready, and the leader said, ready, aim. He said, flood! They all ran. He got out. They got old Murphy up there. Ready, aim. He yelled, fire! I think it was that same hurricane. The wind was so fierce that a chicken in his backyard turned her back to the wind, laid the same egg 5 times. This is a good comment for us. In fact, I can imagine it's being said seriously rather than in jest. This old Irish woman says, God help us, I think the whole world is just full of drug addicts. And if it wasn't for me Valium, I'd be one. You know, somebody once said, and I think it's true, God never sends us anything more than we can handle, unless, of course, you die of something. You know. Are you bored? Slap a cop. Still bored? Tell your wife about your girlfriend. Fellow said, I'm not afraid to die, I just don't want to be there when it happens. Hey, by the way, this is a lovely bit of philosophical lore which holds good. Only the mediocre are always at their best. It's a good line. It's a good line. This is a story that was told by a very, very good friend of mine. I've told it many times. Maybe you've heard it. There's a place in the Midwest, right outside a little country town, where there's a clover leaf that is banked in such a way that if you do not obey the speed limit coming off it, you'll shoot off. And one day, a truckload of gas, one of the major gasoline companies, was going a little bit too fast, shot off the road, and plowed right into a barn. There was an explosion. The barn was burning. So they could see it right from the little town, and about 4 engines came out. The heat was so intense, they couldn't get near enough to it to put it out. And they're standing there watching helpless when this little old volunteer fire department truck from the next town comes barreling in with the old chief drunk as a monkey driving that thing, clanging the bell, and just drove right through the crowd. They jumped to avoid being killed, and they went right up that barn, banged into the wall, and these fellows jumped out and beat the fire out. And the local TV commentator was there, and he's commenting on it as it happened. Meantime, one of the executives from the gasoline company comes out from the town. Soon it was all over. They wrote this fella, the gasoline exec, wrote this old fire chief check for $1,000 for his volunteer fire department. So the local TV interviewer is telling this old man, he said, that's the greatest act of bravery, he said, we've ever seen around here. It's been magnificent. He said, by the way, what are you going to do with that $1,000? He said, the first thing I'm going to do is get the brakes fixed on that fire truck.